I'm Michael Pritchard, retired professor of philosophy and director of an ethics center at Western Michigan University. In Kalamazoo, Michigan.
And so what is your field of study? What is your specialization in philosophy and then in applied ethics?
Well, my specialization in philosophy is ethics. And I have taught ethics at the theoretical level and at what I call the practical level. And that includes professional ethics and ethics in engineering, business ethics, and presumably a few other sub-areas of ethics.
And so how did you get involved with API?
Well, that's a good question. How did I get involved with API? I was friends with David Smith at Indiana University for several years. We did several projects together that involved going around to small colleges in Ohio and Indiana and meeting with faculty and talking with them about ways in which they might try to introduce ethics in their respective disciplines. Could be philosophy, could be business, could be psychology, whatever was happening at that college or university that someone there thought had something to do with ethics or should have something to do with ethics. So David and I conducted day-long and sometimes more than one day workshops for these faculty. Then sometime later, David let me know that there was going to be a conference at the University of Nebraska. And one of the topics there was going to be whether or not some sort of association of practical and professional ethics should be started. And this would include schools from the East, the Midwest, the West. Primary focus was on the United States, but eventually there were people in other countries as well who got involved. Anyway, I told David, yes, I'd be very interested in this. Our ethics center had begun at Western Michigan in 1985, and so this was just a short time after we had gotten started, and we were still trying to find our way about. So to have a chance to talk with other faculty from other colleges and universities about ethics centers, that was something that I thought was a great opportunity for me. So I went, and while we were there at Nebraska, there was a long table of other people, somewhat like me, although most of them were from the big, well-known places, the Ivy League and so forth, and I felt honored to be among them. And then when the decision was made to start up an association, and I was asked if I'd be interested in being on the board of directors, I thought, wow, yes, of course. And so I was on the first board nearly 30 years ago, and I was on that board for 12 years or more. And my last run in that set of consecutive years, I was the director of the board for 1 year. My first wife had developed Alzheimer's, and I said, I'm sorry, but I can't do this sort of thing with the association and at the same time tend to the needs of my wife. So I stepped aside, and a few years later, I was on the board again for 3 years. So I have come to virtually all of the API meetings since it began, and it's a high watermark for me to do that.
And how, do you think, how has it evolved since it began? Do you see some changes evolution, in the programming and the formation of it, and the purpose?
I'm not sure if the purpose has changed, at least not as I understand it. I thought from the outset that APPE could provide a home away from home for faculty who loved teaching ethics, but were regarded, for the most part, as on the margins of their own discipline, whatever it is. This was not an area that was standardly one in which, if you do well at this sort of thing, you'll get tenure. Most people felt that they had to do something else too in order to get a secure position. And it also provided an opportunity, we thought, and still do, for young people. Some of us are getting gray hair, but there are a lot of young people who are very interested in teaching ethics as well. And this would be a home for them, a place where they could go once a year, and sometimes there are activities in between that would give them the opportunity to develop their interests and abilities in teaching ethics. So for me, I already had tenure. I'm an old guy. But it was really nice to be able to go away from Kalamazoo and meet with people who had like interests and join with them and compare notes. And that's how I've viewed APPE all along. There have been a variety of things that APPE has done outside of the official annual meetings, and I've been involved in some of those. And this is a really good thing. So I think a highlight of my long career at Western Michigan University is not only teaching ethics there, but also interacting with people from a variety of places who share my interests. And at least for a while, when we get together, we feel like we're where we want to be, where we should be. Then we go back home and hope that we'll be accepted.
What about the future? As you look forward, an organization like APPE can continue to provide a home for the faculty members, as you've just described, I suppose. Is there something more or different, given societal norms, the development of these fields, the relationships that have been built at APPE over time? Is there something that, as you look forward, you think APPE should become or should grow into or challenge itself to be?
The future of APPE. I think it can continue as it has in the past, but I think what's happened over the years is there's a greater acknowledgement that ethics, although it is at home in departments of philosophy and religion, it doesn't belong only there. And I think the Hastings Center did an interesting study in the late 1970s and published a series of monographs about ethics, the place of ethics in not just philosophy, but in all these other areas. I think that this is a slow growth phenomenon. Many people in disciplines other than philosophy have looked to philosophy to provide some leadership. I think what APPE has done is tried to acknowledge that it isn't just philosophy that needs to lead. This is something that schools in business, they should be taking a lead. Schools of engineering, social work, sociology, education, you name it, and ethics could have a home there. I think APPE's job in the future is to keep this acknowledgement going and let it grow. Disciplines change, ethics changes, to some extent at least. But it should find a place in all these disciplines. And it should break down barriers. I mean, sometimes it's said that, gee, science is one thing and ethics is another. And you can do good science, teach good science, leave ethics to somebody else. But I think the area of research ethics has shown that this is not an acceptable view. And one of the places of leadership of API is to encourage the exploration of ethics in research. So it helps to bring disciplines together. I like that. I think that's good. It's fun for me. It's important for me. And I'd like to see this to be less of a struggle than it was when I first set out on the adventure of trying to connect my training in philosophy with the teaching of ethics. And it was not a smooth path, but it was a path I was determined to try to figure out how to navigate.
What got you interested in navigating that path? What was there a big social event or an aha moment in your research? What brought you to that?
What brought me to this attempt to apply my training in philosophy to the teaching of ethics, and the teaching of ethics to move from just theory to practice was in my first year of teaching. I was at Eastern Michigan University, freshly minted Ph.D., ready to teach moral philosophy. And after about 2 weeks in this class, a student put his hand up and said, "I don't like this stuff." And I said, "Why not?" "It's not relevant." This was back in the late 60s when relevance was a big term. And I said, "Not relevant to what?" And they said, "It's not relevant to the ethical problems that we face every day." Such as, I asked, such as there's a very unpopular war, the Vietnam War. There have been riots in Detroit, which was only 20 miles from Eastern Michigan University. And it went on. And I thought, well, why aren't we talking about these things in this class? Well, nothing that I had had as a graduate student prepared me for that. And the readings that I had for the class had nothing in particular to contribute to that. So it was like starting all over. But I thought, well, why did I go into philosophy? I went into philosophy because I was keenly interested in questions like, well, what's the meaning of life, and how should I live my life, and so forth. And here I was in the classroom with a Ph.D. teaching a class that virtually said nothing about that. And I thought, I should do something about that. So that set me off. And it was a long adventure. I first I thought, well, maybe political philosophy would help. Well, that had its problems too. How about business ethics? Well, what do I know about business? I'm a trained philosopher. So I talked with some people in the College of Business at my university, and they were kind of interested, but they were skeptical about philosophers getting into this sort of thing because, after all, weren't philosophers pink? Now, pink was associated with socialism and communism and things of that sort. And I said, well, philosophy is not just one thing, and ethics is not just one thing in philosophy. There are a variety of things, but I realized I had a lot to learn. And the biggest lesson I needed to learn was how to talk with people who were not themselves philosophers, but were interested in ethics. So this opened up many, many doors, and there were a few accidents along the way that kept me going. Ethics in engineering is a big area of interest of mine, although I'm not by any means a trained engineer, and I hadn't really talked with engineers about ethics until I went to a 2-week workshop in Chicago, developed by Vivian Weil, who was the director of an ethics center there and became active on the ground floor in API herself, who came in at the same time. But I began to talk with engineers, and they were interested in ethics, but almost to a person at this workshop, they said, they don't know anything about ethics. Well, I could honestly say that I know almost nothing about engineering. But I didn't believe, I said, it can't be true that you know nothing about ethics. Let's see if we can figure out how to talk about ethics together in ways that will be relevant to you, engineer, as you go back to your school and try to introduce your students in engineering to ethical dimensions of engineering. That got me started. I went back to my own university and I told a couple of engineers that I knew and the faculty that where I had been for 2 weeks, and the next thing I knew I was on a list. I was the list. This guy can come and talk to our classes about ethics. And so I spent a lot of time going into classes and trying to, in the space of an hour, introduce the students to ethics in engineering. And within a couple of years, this was so much fun that I developed a course on ethics in engineering, which continues today. But somehow the students put up with this engineeringly ignorant guy. Anyway, it's... So this is just a snippet of the story of how I began and why I continued to maintain this sort of interest. So
you mentioned Vivian Weil. You mentioned David Smith. Were there other people who influenced your thinking or who were with you on this journey?
So who else besides David Smith and Vivian Weil reinforced my interest in API? There are a number of others, some of whom are quite active in API today, as I am. Denny Elliott was someone that I had known before API began. Pat Werhane was someone that I knew before, still know her, admire her work, admire Denny's work. Cicely Bach was on the founding board, and Cicely Bach had written a book on lying, which I read, and I actually used that with one of my colleagues in communication. We taught a course on basically ethics, the ethics of lying, using Cicely Bach's book and other materials. But she is well known for many other writings, including a book on that she edited on Henry Sidgwick and his notion of practical ethics. There are others. Bob Fullenwider was on the first board, and a number of other people. I mean, as the association grew, I kind of grew with it and got to meet a lot of people that I might not ever have met, and continued to work with them. So the engineering ethics book has gone through 6 editions, and it was begun with the late Mike Rabins from Texas A&M, and Ed Harris, who's now retired from there. But we began working together and making presentations at API and developed a long association. 6th edition came out in 2019, and it's probably the last edition. I mean, it's had a long haul, but the issues that we raise in that book continue to bother us, and we want to explore them further. And there are other people involved in engineering ethics that I would never have met had it not been for some of the initial encounters that I had with other people who shared some of the interests that I had. So I couldn't name all the people. And one thing I will say, though, is for many years, before API came into existence, I regularly went to the American Philosophical Association meetings, and I met a lot of people there, and always looked forward to either the Eastern, the Central, or the Western Division meetings of that association. Eventually, I got to the point where I looked forward to API and who would be on the program and who I would have a chance to meet, and I almost never look at the APA any longer. I look at the program, and so many of the presentations at the APA are kind of like that course that I was telling you about a few minutes ago, the moral philosophy course, where it's a long step from the theoretical stuff that's of interest to a small group of philosophers, to the issues that I'm interested in that I think have philosophical dimensions, but are also of interest to people who are not trained in philosophy, but are very thoughtful about ethical issues. That's my home.
Great. It's great. Michael, I'm curious, you talked about some of these knotty problems that remain in the 6th edition of your book. What are some of those problems that have continued in engineering ethics?
Well, I mean, how can one go through writing 6 editions of a book on engineering ethics? I mean, why can't we just say, here's the book, end of story, read it? Well, the problem is when we read it again, each edition, we see things somewhat differently. And I think that this is characteristic, for me at least, of philosophical or philosophically oriented inquiry. The questions don't go away. They come back. New things happen in society, and it changes the landscape. And it may be that the way we saw conflicts of interest in 1990 aren't quite the same as we look at them in 2020. We have continual technological developments that are unprecedented. So, when I first began to think about engineering ethics, computers played a role in some parts, but not everywhere. And now you can't find an area in engineering that isn't wedded to issues in software and hardware, and it's really hard to anticipate where these things will take us. So, not that many years ago, we had access to small computers that we could put in a bag and carry around with us. And we could communicate through email. And now there are many other ways in which we can communicate that rely on computerization. I have in my pocket, I won't get it out to show you because it will look too antique, but I have an iPhone. And this iPhone can do so many things. And there are some things that it can't do. It can't just turn off and go away, or if it's off, I can turn it on, and I could be driving my car, and I could be talking into it. I could be calling up things and looking at what's on the screen, and I could have a very bad accident. Now, what accounts for this? Well, the earliest developers of the iPhones they knew that if it's small enough, it can be carried onto the car and it can be used. But one of the leaders said not to worry about that because common sense would say, don't do this. Well, so much for common sense. Now, I don't know what tomorrow will bring us, but will we have thought about it? Will we have done anything to prevent problems that you might say, boy, if we hadn't done this, we wouldn't have this problem. So these are problems that will change through time. Now, the principles and basic ideas that we apply ethically to these problems, they may stay not exactly identical through time, but there are nuances that can come up. And I think that those people who teach ethics in the area of engineering need to realize that things will not be static, or if they are in their teaching, they'll be inadequate for the subject area.
So you would say that's one of the ways that API is useful to get us to thinking about the future as well as the past. Would you say that?
I think API is instrumental in helping us to do a better job of anticipating the kinds of ethical problems that might come up in engineering or wherever. One of the areas that a number of presentations have been made in the last few years about problems that will come with automated vehicles. And there are every year 2 or 3 panels that deal with this. In the year 2000, there were 0. In the year 2010, there were 0. I don't know when the first panel was. It could have been close to 2010, but I doubt it. And when it comes up, say, someday we're going to have these automated cars. What kinds of problems will there be? Well, cars will have accidents. There's no perfection here. Accidents will be reduced if this is handled well. And the first obligation of engineers in every code of ethics is protect public health and safety. Well, it's not perfect. So you say, okay, if we introduce these automated cars and take the decision-making out of the hands of the driver or the person who would have been the driver, some people will still die. Under what kinds of circumstances? How do we plan for this? How do we justify this? I mean, right now, we can attribute a lot of these accidents that result in fatalities to the driver behind the wheel. But now, we'll have to change, at least to some extent, and say, it's not the driver behind the wheel, it's the mechanism within which the driver and the passengers are seated, and then those at risk are out there innocently walking on the streets or innocently sitting in another vehicle that's going in the opposite direction or whatever. I mean, these are mammoth kinds of problems. And you can't just say, machine, you figure it out. Although some might actually think that makes sense. I don't know. Anyway, lots of big problems.
That gives us an idea of some of the problems that API is really good at discussing with other people across disciplines, I would say. That's great. Any other comments? Any other questions you have, Gretchen?
Michael, I would thank you for being here. And since we talked to you about coming, was there anything on your mind that you said, boy, you know what, I really want to share for posterity, right? These ideas and thoughts on the whole, on your career, on the field, on where it's been, where it's going, kind of a wide open question for you.
I'm going to hear from Elaine for a minute because she's going to get everybody happy.
Okay, swap seats.
Yep.
Well, I think I look forward to the day that young people in particular can come to APPE, put it on their resume, and it will light up for them as going to the American Philosophical Association meetings did for me for many years. But there's a kind of openness of inquiry that APPE promotes that I think should retain its strength that it's acquired over the last nearly 30 years. And APPE should be a home away from home for academics from any field. And it isn't just academics. I mean, APPE also supports the participation of people who are engineers but not teachers of engineering, business people who are not teachers of business, social workers who are social workers out in the field and not in the classroom. So the integration is not only across disciplines, academic disciplines, but it's an integration with people outside of the academy. And I think in the future, APPE could probably do better at that. I mean, if you look at the membership, it's primarily academics, but there's no reason why it should be just academics. Especially those in well-paid fields should be able to afford once in a while to take a break from their day-to-day work and come and associate with people who have shared interest in ethics, whatever area that might be. And I think that it's good for the individual, it's good for the organization, and hopefully it's good for the larger society for these things to take place. The idea that all you have to do as you grow up is find your niche and stick to it and keep your nose out of trouble, that's not good enough for us in the world that we live in today. There are too many problems that are pervasive if only we'll notice them and take them into account. So hooray for APPE.